Well, today on Practical Church Planting, we're talking about 6 preaching myths. 6 myths we believe about preaching that simply are not true. And speaking of preaching, today the Practical Preaching course launches. And so you want to head to practicalpreachingcourse.com and get in on the course, because next Monday the course increases from $59 to $99. So get in on the action this week before the price increases for good, and invest in yourself as a preacher as we talk about the 6 myths that we believe about preaching.
Welcome back to Practical Church Planting, where in 15 minutes or less, we'll give you practical tips, advice, and encouragement to help you plant and grow healthy churches. My name is Brian Drosian. Joining me is Dylan Dodson, and today we're talking about 6 preaching tips.
So today is the launch of Practical Preaching.
Oh.
And so with that, we thought we'd give you some myths that you and I believe or have believed in the past that aren't true when it comes to preaching.
Yes.
You ready for it, Brian?
Oh, I was born ready.
Let's go through it. Number 1, and this is a myth that I think we probably think more subconsciously than overtly, but it is true, is that I'll get better the more I preach. So
It's an interesting one.
the myth out there is that the more opportunities I get, once we're launching or now that I'm preaching every week, I will just get better. And that's all I really need to worry on.
Yeah.
Now, the reality is the more opportunities you get, you will get better. I mean, you'll be able to go slower. You'll be able to think. I mean, you won't be as nervous. Like, all these things are true. But if you want to become a better preacher, and we're not just saying this because our preaching course came out,
Right.
but you actually have to invest in it.
Yeah.
It's like any skill or any talent that you want to get better in. You have to actually practice and do things, whether that is buying courses, which we have partaken in other online preaching courses.
Yeah.
Making it a regular habit to listen or watch other preachers that are good, that you like. But you need to do something to actually develop your preaching, as opposed to just preaching on the weekends or when you get opportunities, because you will never get as good as you could be if you're not intentional about developing your gift and your skill.
Yeah, I think getting more reps is helpful in a sense of it, especially if you're newer, help with nerves, help with slowing down, like you said, and just kind of those quirks and jitters when you're newer that you kind of tend to rush through. So I think getting more reps will help kind of iron some of those things out, but I think it won't do as much as we kind of hope it will.
And I'll give you even just a personal example. So we launched in April of 2017, so almost a little over about 20 months ago or so. And that was the first time that I was preaching every single Sunday. And so, things were getting better a little bit. But then January of this year came, and I was like, one of the things that I want to do this year is actually just become a better communicator. And that's not just going to happen by me just getting and preaching more.
Yeah.
And so I bought a course. I watched more preachers. I listened to podcasts. I researched how to do certain things. And I would say, of course, now it's another year, and we're a year and a half-ish, a little over into it. So of course there's still you're still newer, so you're going to get better. But I am better than I would have been if I had still been doing what I was doing a year ago.
Yeah,
there's no questions asked. And so the myth is that you'll just get better the more you preach. You've got to be investing in it, the various different ways and tools that we have today because of technology. But don't just preach and think you're going to get better. If you actually want to get better, do something to actually invest in yourself.
Yeah, and that's the great thing is there's no shortage of tools and resources and things out there. So if you truly want to get better, there's a lot of places to turn.
We have our course and we like it,
Yep.
but I'm not trying to promote our own thing. Other courses, other things.
Yep.
Listen, do something to be intentional about getting better. Don't just think you're going to preach and all of a sudden you're going to be better.
Yeah. One caveat before we move on to number 2 is if you're in a position where either you don't preach all the time, or you haven't launched yet, or you're newer to it, I would still say take every rep you can get.
Yes.
Every opportunity.
Absolutely.
If you're a guest somewhere, something like that, if you don't get to preach often, take everything you can
If
get.
you're busy, got a lot going on,
Yeah.
that needs to be one of your biggest priorities,
Yeah.
is to actually take opportunities. So number 1, I'll get better the more I preach. Number 2, I just need to preach the gospel.
Oh.
This is so far not true. It's just not true. And
Yeah.
I know it's like the godly Christian biblical thing to say, I just need to preach the Bible, preach the gospel. That's just not true.
Yeah.
If you're boring, if you're unengaging, if you're not moving people, if you're not being prophetic and calling people to repent, if you're not doing things that actually are engaging, so people are actually listening to you, it does not matter. Let's think of in our day and age that people still do the street preaching thing.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody listens. You could be the best communicator ever. You could be whoever your favorite communicator, whoever your favorite preacher is. For me, Tim Keller. He's one of my favorites. If there was a guy who was as good as Tim Keller preaching on the sidewalk, I would be walking right by him.
Yeah, you wouldn't even notice.
I don't care.
Yeah.
And so this isn't have to say a ton of jokes or be fake, but you have to. You can't just study and preach the word.
Mm-hmm.
You have to present and you have to craft your sermon in a way that's an engaging way, so people will want to listen and lean in. Now, people have different giftings and skills, but it's not enough. And this is one of the things I did early on at New City. I was like, I wrote my sermon. I was like, I'm done.
Yeah.
I didn't spend enough time being like, no, I'm not. It's not enough just to have good content. You got to be engaging with it so people's hearts and minds are actually changed.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things that we all wish was true. Like
Yes.
we all wish that if you just get up there and read the book of Romans and people would come running and that's all they'd want to hear, but it's just not the world we live
It's
in.
not, and I'll be honest with you, like the studying aspect to me, and people are different, is like the easy part.
Yeah.
The hardest part for me when it comes to me putting my sermons together is me sitting there staring at the wall, trying to think of illustrations throughout the sermon
Yeah.
so that I can give people a chance to breathe and to re-engage. It's not the studying and here's what the Bible says and here's how it applies, but saying it in a way that's practical and giving illustrations and stories to illustrate and draw people in. Again, how did Jesus mainly teach? Parables and stories. And so we have the knowledge, we've got to make it engaging so that people can actually be moved by it.
Yeah, I think one thing, when we've talked about this a bunch before, but one thing you got to remember is that we're preaching to regular people.
Yep.
And these rules that kind of apply to public speaking in the workforce, just public speaking out in the world, a lot of them apply to preaching as well because you're
Exactly.
speaking to the same people. So those same rules and same things still apply.
So I just need to preach the gospel. That just won't work if you actually want to reach people that don't know Jesus. You've got to be effective and in that. So number 3, we've talked about this before, but the idea that longer is better. Longer is not better. In fact, the opposite is true. Shorter is better
Right.
between the two. Like if you're sitting there and you're talking, you've shared this on a previous episode. One time you preached here at New City, maybe it was your first time.
It was, yeah.
And you looked up at the timer and you're like, oh, I still have like 10 minutes or whatever I could go. The thought is, I'm just going to keep rambling on. Do not do that. People would rather, it's better to leave people wanting more than boring them to death. Or
Yeah.
like having a great 30-minute sermon, but you went 40 minutes. And so the last 10 minutes, you lost people. So the impact you could have had was minimized because you went way too long.
Yeah, and this is one thing that can really be ironed out in rehearsing and going over, especially if you're not as comfortable, because I think you can do this one of two ways. Either A, you can just kind of ramble and keep going on, or you can prepare to speak way longer than you should.
Yep.
You could throw in way too much content and prepare this big long sermon, and you didn't ramble at all, and it was all planned out. But at the end of the day, people still stopped listening 15 minutes
Yeah,
ago.
because it was too long.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've talked about it before. Things like, practicing out loud and that sort of thing, actually knowing how long your sermon is. And so not that shorter is good or longer is good, a good, whatever that middle place is good.
Right.
But like, if you have to choose between the two, shorter is better. It is not true that longer makes you more spiritual. It can just make you more boring and make you, because you didn't prepare, so you just rambled.
Yeah, adding more and more information or more and more stories, or just adding as much as possible in there does not make it more engaging.
So that's number 3, longer is better. Number 4, environment doesn't matter. Now, I think this is also in a subconscious one. I don't think most people would say this, but here's what we mean. That it's not just enough to come up and be an amazing communicator or, whatever, all that is good.
Yeah.
But especially like in a Sunday morning context, like the mood of the congregation before you even get up and preach affects like how often or how much they will, sounds bad to say, get out of it, or how engaged they will be. So like, was your service before then good? Like, were people singing? Was there a moment for people to laugh? I don't know, but like if the environment, the mood that people have matters. Now in the preaching course, we actually have a bonus episode giving you some tips on ways that you can make your Sunday morning environment better and more engaging. But you can be the best preacher ever, and of course that'll help. But if people are already engaged when you start, it makes a lot of the work easier than having to try to pull them, and you're never going to quite get there if people are kind of disinterested before you even begin.
Yeah, I've had instances where we've visited new churches, and honestly, the only thing that sticks out in my mind thinking back to them, I don't remember how the preacher was. I don't really remember much of the message, but I remember some of them going to and nobody saying hi, not feeling welcome at all. And as you're there for 10 minutes or whatever before the message, then through worship, and then by the time the message starts, that's all in your head of, people don't even seem like they want me here. Right. And you can't even really get into the message regardless of how great the preacher is.
How you feel, how they feel
Yeah.
makes a big difference. And so you want to make sure the environment is good. We talk more about how to do that in the course. Number 5, people often say, and I'll say this and then give you a caveat and then explain, that I can't get ahead.
Yeah.
What they mean is I can't get ahead of the sermon that I have this week. And of course there are exceptions and I want to be clear when I say there are exceptions, but like there literally are exceptions, and you may be an exception, and that is totally okay.
Yeah.
If you're bivocational, if you're in a season of life where family stuff is crazy, or you've got all these things going on, and you're just busy, that happens. I mean, that 100% happens. It also often happens, in my experience talking to pastors, where there's this idea that we're busy. Like everyone likes to say we're busy, and I know that's true in some cases, but like there's this like myth of like being a pastor automatically makes me busy, and I'm like, I'm a pastor at a church plant. Like I know what busy is supposed to be. It really comes down to priorities.
Yeah.
And so often people are like, I can't get ahead. I think there's just this culture of like everyone says they're busy, and so we just say we're busy. you can get more than a week ahead of your sermon prep. And I'll just tell you from personal experience, we were about 4 or 5 weeks ahead at New City. Not saying that you need to get there, but even just being 2 weeks ahead makes all the difference in the world. Just how you like for me on Monday morning, I come in, I write my already written message on a whiteboard and I tweak it throughout the week, but not having the pressure of having to start from scratch on Monday changes my mood and my ability to focus and do things during the week, especially if things get busy, because I've already ahead, so I don't have to like scramble and write a sermon from scratch. But I just want to say you actually can get ahead. We talk about it again in the course, Practical Preaching as well, but you can get ahead, and I think it will be better for you in the long run to actually do that than just be week to week every single week.
Yeah, I think the content we share in the course is really helpful, but I think the biggest thing is it may take a little bit of a grind at first, I guess, to initially kind of start that, but as soon as you kind of push through that a little bit and then you get in the rhythm of it, I'm sure you'll say it's not that big a deal once you're in the rhythm of it.
And I remember, especially if you're newer, you might get stressed of like, well, I can't prepare another sermon until I preach the one that I have prepared right now because I can't think ahead. I'm just going to get confused.
Yeah.
I remember being there, but it's really not that difficult once you do it. And then it just becomes like second nature and just, I mean, it makes your week of way less stressful.
Yeah.
And so I would just say, just like, I don't know if I can do it. Just try it. Write another message, even though you have one. This is more so if you don't have a lot of experience, so you kind of think you can't. Write another message before you even give your next one, and you'll find, oh, it's actually not that bad. And if you're super busy, the next week that you don't preach, don't take that week off. Still prepare a sermon. You're already a week ahead. Christmas is coming up, so maybe things slow down a bit. Maybe you don't have services the last Sunday, or maybe you do have the last Sunday of December and someone else is preaching. Use that week. I know you're like, I want the break. I know. But use that week to get ahead. I think it is worth it so that you're not week to week every single week. It is a myth that you can't get ahead. There are exceptions, absolutely. But generally speaking, you can get ahead if you prioritize it.
Yeah, and I think what you said was good, especially if you're extremely busy or you're bivocational and you're just thinking, I don't know how I'd fit this in my week, is find a week to get a youth pastor in there, or to call a pastor friend from another church and have him come and preach at your church one week, just to have that week to kind of get a break and use it to start getting ahead, and then you can just stay in that rhythm.
Yeah, we don't have it as one of the myths, but you don't have to preach every week. That is a thing. It's one of the myths you don't preach every week. But getting ahead, you can do it. Trust me, you can do it if it's important to you. That's number 5. Number 6, and lastly, here we go. Ready for this one? If we haven't made you be like, I don't know if I agree with one of those yet, maybe this is the one.
Ooh, I'm ready.
I can't preach without notes. I can't preach without notes. Maybe it would be nice. Maybe I can't preach with even limited notes.
Yeah, less notes.
Less notes. I want to say even limited, because maybe less notes for you is from 10 pages to 7 pages. Let me just say limited, like a page or less, just an outline. You can.
Yeah.
I know we're talking about the course a lot, but hey, we're excited about it. We talk about one of the modules in the course, how you can preach without notes or with limited notes. I think this is also one of the things that we just assume is true. If you've been following Practical Church Planting or my blog, I've been sharing, kind of my preaching journey this year, how I got to be without notes and that sort of thing. And I'll tell you, my biggest hesitancy this year, when I had 5-ish pages of notes, now I have none, was that I couldn't actually do it.
Yep.
Like I would look at guys and I'd be like, there's no way that I could actually do it. Now, once I started working at it, I still didn't think I could do it, but I started lowering the amount of notes I had, and then I realized, oh, this is something I can actually do. Now, I'm not saying that everybody needs to preach without notes or that everyone's better without notes. I think, generally speaking, that is true. Mm-hmm. Yes, there are exceptions. Especially, again, it has to do with our culture today. You might be thinking like Charles Spurgeon or Jonathan Edwards, they've maybe, read word from word. Well, we're in a different culture today and age, and people like conversation, that sort of thing. The whole thing we're not going to get into today, but I think by and large, preaching without notes is better or limited. And I just want to say, you can do it if you're willing to put in the work. And the biggest reason we think we can't is just because we think we can't. Yeah. That is your biggest hurdle, not your ability to actually do it.
Yeah, I would say, and I think you'd agree, that preaching without notes isn't a necessity. You don't have to preach without notes. You don't have to preach with a page of notes, but I think it's a responsibility as a communicator to be growing how engaging you are, or growing how well you communicate with your audience. And one of those ways nowadays is to be looking down less.
Yes.
That's just the way it is. So it doesn't mean that you have to get to 0 notes. You may be sitting here thinking, I don't even want to. But honestly, I think one of the reasons a lot of us might be saying I don't really want to is because we don't think you can. Right.
And just to be honest, what we want to do doesn't mean it's the best thing to do.
Also true, yeah.
So just because we don't want to, maybe doesn't mean we shouldn't.
Yeah.
Or use less. So again, these are the 6 real quick. I'll get better the more I preach. I just need to preach the gospel. Longer is better. Environment doesn't matter. I can't get ahead, and I can't preach without notes. So thanks for being with us. Again, get in on Practical Preaching that launches today, because the price goes up from $59 to $99 next Monday.
Yes.
If you have questions about preaching, ministry, church planning, practicalpreaching.com/questions. And if you want to access the preaching course, it is practicalpreachingcourse.com. So thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time on Practical Church Planting. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Practical Church Planning. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Practical Planning, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you like or subscribe or do whatever it's telling you to do or should do on that platform.
And hey, if you are so tired of looking at our ugly faces, but you're not tired of listening to our beautiful voices, then you can find our podcast if you just search Practical Church Planning on iTunes or Google Play. Make sure not to just find it, not just to listen, but to subscribe.
Make sure you subscribe. Brian, tell them to subscribe.
Subscribe.
See you next time.